Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Friday, November 17th, so we're already at the uh, point of Black Friday sales, and we're getting close to actual Black Friday next week, and the Thanksgiving November part of that has really no connection to video games at all, so it is really become completely stolen as far as the season goes, and it is 100% now just Black Friday stuff and sales. And the thing there is Thanksgiving in general always had some major problems with it as a holiday. It's not a particularly fun holiday. It's built around a lot of concepts of hanging out with your family, which most people don't want to do that either. So yeah, there is the idea of a forced day of being thankful never made any sense logically. Like, if you're being forced to be thankful, then you're not really thankful. If you're or you're just not naturally coming towards that thankfulness. Thanksgiving in general is centered around like the Columbus eventually killing all the Native Americans and taking the land of the United States away from First Nations Native American people. So yeah, there's just major problems, and always have been, with Thanksgiving. And on top of that, there's just major problems with, let's just not even call it the Christmas season. Let's take it to the next step. Let's be realistic. From pretty much November 1st to December 31st is the shopping season in the United States, at least. It is all about purchasing gifts. Long since have they eliminated the concept of making gifts or giving gifts, or even just giving things that people need, such as clothing and socks. That has been derided through movies and TVs and Hollywood so much. It's just like, yeah, and just advertisements in general. Like, right now the economy is fairly bad, so it would make a lot of sense for this to be a Christmas where people just got socks and clothing, pants, shoes, things like that, and that was just their only gift, or their one gift that year, and which is how it was hundreds of years ago, or decades and decades ago, is that you maybe would get one toy for Christmas, and now that would be almost tantamount to child abuse or neglect at this level. There's just so much of a normalizing of buying lots of gifts, lots of toys, and video games are in no way different. Whoops. Okay, let's see how we're gonna fix this. Let's see. What I want to do, what's going wrong here is we need my smart on-air switcher is running the first macro, which is the auto blur macro on this, and that's one thing that I'm going to have to work on, is that anybody who already has existing things that would probably fix this the best just by seeing if this works. No, I've forgotten what the unblur button would be. Guess you want this for that. Alright, that's some of that. And then you want that. There we go. So yeah, Thanksgiving and the shopping holiday is well upon us. Noticeably in Yu-Gi-Oh! In this case, and I guess I'm already moving kind of slow today. But yeah, I imagine I'll be even more delayed for the rest of the year, on top of working on the Smart On Air screen sign, which I said I was going to integrate HomeKit. I started to play around with that. I realized to use the library that's available would require it taking over too much of the code, in the sense that both the HomeKit software and my software, both of them want to have their own Wi-Fi access setup page, and they're not integrated, and it just doesn't look like there'd be an easy way to integrate it, to configure it. It looks to me like, in the same way that Matter is just too much code, it looks like HomeKit is also just too much code, and there's real argument for better optimization, at least on the software development side, of what Matter is and what HomeKit is, and really just what Matter is, because it kind of doesn't matter so much if something's Matter HomeKit compatible if it is Matter compatible, because Matter works in HomeKit, or at least I think it does. But yeah, it would have just taken up too much work without being able to test anything by not having an iPhone or any kind of iPhone device. There is no Android app for HomeKit, which is kind of crazy, because you would think that Apple, of all the Apple apps that exist, HomeKit as a feature being on Android kind of could work. There are certain features and apps on iPhones that, if you put the Android versions of them out there, might push more people to eventually move over to iPhones. Got some new daily quests. Got another Duel Live. Now, I did do a solo story, and in the solo thing, I did tribute summon a monster. So, tribute summoning a monster in solo isn't just gonna work. So we're in this weird situation where the only way I'm gonna get forward on this is by either playing range with a deck that tribute summons something, or maybe free play with a deck that tributes something. We've got a new card here, which this is an XYZ card, so that's somewhat newer. Like, I think XYZs were from the second anime series. So, which, yeah. There's a small selection of XYZ cards that I think are actually still playable, but not that many. It probably isn't too different from the percentage of cards that are playable from the original series. Okay, casual match. Then let's change decks. Which deck do I think would even have a thing? Let's go with Power of the Dragon. I suspect if anything's going to be tribute summoned, it could be this deck. So yeah, I spent a little bit of time investigating whether I should go forward on the idea of integrating HomeKit. It's a nice idea for a version 2.0 of the Smart Online Slang, if a version 2.0 really needed to happen. You're very quickly hitting a wall of just adding features to a gadget that doesn't really need features. If you look at, say, a kitchen timer or an egg timer or something like that, like, it's pretty much a device that's been perfected. Yes, you could make it a smart device and it could create an alarm that would go off on your phone so you could walk away from your cooking, which you probably shouldn't ever do, but yeah, in particular a kitchen timer, it doesn't make a lot of sense to walk away from your cooking if you're only cooking for 4 or 5 minutes. It does make more sense that you'd walk away from your cooking if you're doing a slow cooker and it's 4 or 5 hours. But there's kind of not that much more you could do. You could put maybe a vibration sensor in a kitchen timer, and then it could tell you maybe if the pot on a range was boiling over. Maybe you could put a temperature sensor into it, or even a humidity sensor in it, and then you're adding more features. There certainly is an argument that, particularly in kitchen cooking equipment, that there's some things that are so simplistic that do one thing and only one thing when they could have multiple uses. They never really did perfect the idea of making a automated pot stirrer. There's like 2 gadgets out there that try it, but neither one really work well. But certainly if you had a device like that and then threw in a timer and a thermostat and a humidity sensor, all of those together, might work. This access code talker is a big one. Something went wrong with my chat, and so if somebody types in the chat today, I'm gonna just go ahead and say I'm not gonna be able to see it, so apologies for that. But yeah, you very quickly start to run out of things you can add, was the point I was trying to make, and then I really countered that point by showing that if you're creative about it, you can actually add quite a bit to a lot of simple things. As for the smart on-air side, though, like, you wouldn't want to make it a smoke detector or any kind of safety equipment. You might want to integrate it into a system of safety equipment, but that's about all you would want to do with it. But yeah, in particular, my experience yesterday, for the small number of hours I was awake, which is still a major problem, is that the more I run my heater, the more it gets winter, the more I sleep to ridiculous amounts of time. Oh, come on, I'm gonna lose before I even really have an opportunity to do anything. Which this really highlights. Let's just save some time and surrender. This highlights the problem, though, with a lot of these pre-built decks, is that they're just utterly unplayable, even in casual, because the people playing in casual are still playing the top-tier meta decks. They just, for one reason or another, don't want to compete in ranked. And there feels like there's probably a little bit too much of a separation between what you can earn playing casual versus playing ranked, when you should be able to do all the daily quests, and I'm not sure you really can do all the daily quests in casual, and just never play ranked if you don't choose to. Some people are just not particularly happy around that idea of competitiveness. Although on a collectible card game, if you're not happy about the idea of competitiveness, there's really no reason to be playing at all. But yeah. I didn't make as much progress on the instructions. I'm still incredibly, ridiculously slow about writing the instructions, but as I was thinking about the instructions, I did decide to change it so that you can name the internal hotkey that the Smart On Air sign runs as far as Advanced Scene Switcher, which in theory means it could run any hotkey, not just an Advanced Scene Switcher hotkey. But by making that a variable and letting the user determine that, then that does open up the possibility of it just not being it just being blank and then not activating anything, which is probably the default solution that should be there. Because it really doesn't make a lot of sense for it to always by default call out for a macro that very possibly won't be there for a lot of users. Well, we got this far. We summoned a fourth thing. Now the problem is getting a sixth thing. 6-star. But yeah, I noticed a bug that the way I was trying to reconnect to the OBS WebSocket after you change the settings was wrong, and it took me a long time to figure out the right way to do that. And then I was struggling for some reason. The way I was getting the hotkey name was coming with one extra, probably null character, just a special character to tell the file that this is the end of the string. Well, that special null character was causing OBS WebSocket to crash, which yeah, there's not a lot of sanitizing the code as far as what it receives to adjust for that, or there's none of that really, so it just totally breaks the entire connection and tries to start over just when it receives a null character or when it receives something unexpected in general. The idea of WebSockets in general perhaps have just not been embraced enough to get enough good code, but I would say specifically OBS WebSocket as a plugin is just not robust enough. It does just have a lot of places where it's either you do it exactly right and send the exact signal as it expects it, or it will just reset everything without any feedback, without any assistance, without any help. Which definitely would explain why there's not as much embracing of OBS WebSocket or WebSockets in general, when really the idea of WebSockets makes a decent amount of sense for a lot of things, for softwares to communicate with each other. I guess I really don't have anything else to say. Yeah, I had to take that hotkey name and just remove the last character, which is more complicated of a process as far as string manipulation than you would think. There is also a potential problem here in that my smart on the air sign might work when you connected to it through one scene, and then it may stop working when you switch to the other scene, and that's another thought. To potentially have to deal with, and I don't know if there is a particularly great way to deal with that. Okay. So now what? Nothing. Yeah. It's a struggle, frankly, to play even new cards. Like, it's a real problem. Like, just look at how slow this game is going, and how slow, and it's not just 100% me moving slow and me thinking slow. I'll admit that too, certainly, that I'm not quite awake and moving slow, but just trying to figure out what the cards do is really ridiculous. Let's see if I can get this chat to work. other problem here is that the alt key just doesn't want to work. There we go. Got the chat working now, so I can at least see that. It only wants to work every 4 or 5 times on OBS. Really don't have a good explanation for that one. I guess what I need to do is probably just start going through the news fairly quickly. There's really not that much to say. This now month-long project working on the Smart On Air sign. Easily, I could see being 2 months long. I could see it going all the way to the end of the year. There is this issue certainly where one person can really only debug, and debugging or quality assurance QAing software takes a lot of time because you're just running the programs over and over again, and you just need 1,000 different ways to do things that are slightly different, and just to see if something weird happens. And so I just am never going to. There's never a finishing line where you say, all right, I have 100% debugged this software, I think it's rock solid. If anything, there's maybe just a false confidence you could build to think the software is rock solid. So all I know, like slightly different version of Windows or Mac OS or Linux, and everything falls apart. Which I kind of knew at the beginning that was going to be part of this, and that's why I was going to sell this as, hey, this is a prototype. This is absolutely no guarantees, no refunds ever for anything. That is certainly also a thing that can destroy any attempt at being a small business, is that you'll have just things that are broken, things people just don't want to pay for things, so they claim they're broken. And you really just can't afford that. Anyways, you've got to get like the shipping insurance, and then you've got to fight with whatever shipping company you have to say and prove that you've packed it the right way, so that they're willing to actually pay for the device if it actually is damaged in shipping. And then you still have other scammers who just want a refund. You'll get less of that in a more niche web store. You'll get more of that in a more general store. But I do want a product that actually works, and to the best of my ability, to the best of my knowledge, I want it to be 100% rock solid on the code, and I want it to work as much as possible. We really are just getting nowhere on this. This is the other problem of playing casual too, is that you'll have a very high percentage of people who will just surrender the second they don't get that first turn, one turn win hand, and they just have decks that are not verbose enough that regardless of what starting hand you have, you can actually play. Whereas my ranked play deck that I play is particularly good about being playable. Yeah, I guess there's no reason why we'd want to do that, so. So I did have some news here that I wanted to talk about. Assassin's Creed Mirage is getting a new game plus and permadeath mode to arrive as part of a title update in December. Now, one of these takes a decent amount of work, generally speaking. A new game plus, because you have to consider how are you resetting values on the save file without resetting everything, and what really ruins the experience or doesn't make logical sense to be carried over in a new game plus. At a certain level, items and equipment can be carried over in a new game plus, but then you need the stats on those items and equipment to either go down, or you need to increase the stats of items and the equipment to be balanced out by the increase of the stats of the enemies. Just trying a very old strategy there of using these cards, mage power, to super power up, and as soon as I disputed that one strategy, he just gives up. So it almost is making an argument here. We're really showing the downfalls, in particular of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, of playing casual, and that you just, maybe you'll get victories quicker, but I'm not even sure this is counting towards the daily quest. I'm not even 100% sure that if I tribute summon something here, it'll count towards the proficiency test. So yeah, it takes a little bit of thought, particularly if you weren't really thinking or hadn't put a lot of effort into having a permanent, a new game plus mode in your game. Although arguably, if you're ever going to have a new game plus mode in your game, you probably should be working at it since day one and just thinking about it. Permadeath mode, on the other hand, is super easy to implement, and the only reason why you wouldn't have that day one is because it ruins the intended way to play Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is very probably the case. So it comes off generally as just an example of them holding back at least permadeath mode to add it into an update to get people back to playing Assassin's Creed Mirage. Which, particularly in December, adding an update to get people playing your game is probably not going to work that well. So, you know, if anything, you can assume Ubisoft just rushed the game out the door, and these were planned launch features, or very closer to launch features. Permadeath mode really should be from the beginning. New Game Plus can be delayed a little bit. This also highlights a issue, certainly with video games, in that I'm gonna lose because I didn't end my turn if I'm not careful. There's just no consistency with playing video games. They come out, and then the next game comes out the next week and people just move on. At least mainstream video game journalists move on and never talk about it. So as for actual gamers, there may be actual gamers playing certain games, but they're fairly inconsistent. And that's one thing that I'm seeing, particularly in this fourth quarter Christmas season, is that we're seeing fewer and fewer people playing video games in one specific game, like something that would get in the top 10, top 25 of the trending charts. I imagine people are playing video games just about the same amount. They might be playing a little less because of either being in school or just being busy with Christmas stuff. But I think what really is happening is, as we get closer to the end of the year, we're just having more and more AAA games come out, and there's just way more diversity in what people are playing. It's no longer the era of there being maybe 2, maybe 3 Saturday morning cartoon channels where all kids would be watching the same cartoons on Saturday morning. Just about. Now it is very much the case where we are in a YouTube style world where you can watch anything and everything, and even a trending algorithm is not going to really direct people in specific general directions. Oh, that was probably a bad analogy. Compulsion Games here, I believe, has their well, they had this 10th anniversary to Contrast, which I liked the visuals for the game Contrast. The actual game was fairly lackluster, and noticeably the visuals being shown here are somewhat like this, but not 100% where this is nowhere close, and this is definitely nowhere close. This is probably a trailer to show off what Contrast is. The gameplay mechanic idea where you are this lady who could become a shadow and interact with shadows to do platforming was very interesting, but actually you kind of didn't do that much platforming. There was the right amount of story and nowhere near the right amount of gameplay in Contrast. It was a 5-hour game at best, and it really should have been a 15-hour game. There should have been multiple worlds, even if it really just had boiled down to a lot of doing the same thing over and over again. It might have been a bit of a bummer of a story too. There we go. Finally we get our tribute summon monster. That's all I've been trying to do for the past 40 minutes, is just tribute summon a monster to get the proficiency test done. Probably won't even win here, but let's play the whole game out just in case. 10 years. This other game, South of Midnight, is not out yet. I thought this was Forspoken looking at this headline banner, but I guess that really goes to show where logos are going to become increasingly more important in video games, because characters are going to be easily confused if you're not paying big attention. In a lot of ways, it's just a huge shame that Contrast wasn't more of a success. It really, really should have been. Video Games Chronicle says Spyro the Dragon is coming to Crash Team Rumble. This multiplayer game continues to struggle to find an audience. Inherently, I kind of feel like Crash Bandicoot is not even as popular as Spyro is, and I feel like there's just a real effort here to try Yeah. I think they probably just tried too many times at this point to make Crash Bandicoot advance. It's probably better to just give up on it. Like, particularly what they're trying to do is make Crash Bandicoot work in completely different styles of games where, like, at best I would imagine Crash Bandicoot works in Crash Bandicoot style platforming games. I do wish Sony had found a better, more consistent, successful platforming character, like mascot character, but Sony really failed to care really about having a mascot character per se. Crash Bandicoot in a lot of ways was definitely on the fast track to be a mascot character, but I don't think Crash Bandicoot actually was owned by Sony, and that was in part of the problem. Was Sony didn't try to compete, nor did they try to buy. Had Sony bought Crash Bandicoot in the PlayStation 1 era, and he was just a kid mascot character, but even Crash Bandicoot was played off as being more adult and a character with more attitude than Mario. But yeah, had they put a lot of money and effort into it and just churned out a whole bunch of games that might have been mediocre or even bad in the hope of just turning them into a mascot, well, then you at least would have had something closer to Sonic. Which, for better or worse, Sonic is the mascot of Sega, and Sonic is still succeeding in releasing new styles of games, even though a lot of the Sonic games are actually rather bad. There's still a fandom there. There's nowhere near as much of a fandom for Crash Bandicoot, it feels like, compared to Sonic. So, can we do anything? I suppose it's worth mentioning that I still am watching Lex, which, I mean, it's still really a bad situation. It feels like just as I was about to get into the idea of watching streaming shows on a weekly basis, watching a new episode, I think we've gotten into either starting to see the echoes of the writer's strike or just straight up winter season and no new episodes coming out being an issue. So yes, I watched the latest episode of Invincible Season 2, but it's just completely unsatisfactory to only watch one episode. And in particular for Invincible Season 2, there was a weird situation where they went to a very late credits in Invincible Season 2. So late, in fact, that I thought the episode was over. And so I was actually very shocked to find that there was like still another 20-30 minutes in the episode, and the what I thought was the end credits were actually the beginning credits. But yeah, not a lot really happens in the episode, and it's just kind of slow. But Lex, in comparison, is really slow. I'm in Season 3 now, and Season 3 at least somewhat, I think, fixes probably a budgetary issue. There definitely was one point in season 2 where they either were doing some kind of gimmick or they were late and didn't finish an episode. And so one episode on Amazon Prime where they're caught in a spider web, you watch the entire episode and it is up to a point where it feels like, alright, the show could have ended there even, or it just ended, that episode ended fairly awkwardly. And then the next episode on Amazon Prime, which maybe this was a gimmick and the 2 episodes aired back to back, but even at that it really wouldn't make sense, is 99% the exact same episode. Like shot for shot. It's not like, oh, there's slight differences, or this is a different camera angle, or this is following a different character. It is the exact same episode until you get to the end of everything you saw in the first episode, and then there's some CGI element added and maybe 5 more minutes of footage. Now an anime series did this, The Melancholy of Haruka Suzuya. I probably mispronounced that. They had an entire season where they called it the Endless 8, which was very experimental in that it was basically 8 episodes that were exactly the same. Although I think by about the 4th episode of weekly releases there were some fairly big changes. But at least in that gimmick, which everybody hated and nobody should ever try again, there was an obvious animation explanation for it, and a storyline explanation for it, to effectively just air the exact same episodes or almost the exact same animation 8 times in a row. So the clear condition doesn't even count in single player. So the last 47 minutes of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Was completely a waste. And noticeably, none of the daily quests can be accomplished in single player. It's in casual match, yeah. It's just ridiculous. Alright. So the only way to make any progress here is to just risk something. This Tier Laments deck, I don't think I ever figured out how to play. The Flow Wander deck, I don't think I really can play that well. We'll select the Flow Wander deck. And it's got a problem. What's the problem with it? They've changed the rules on something. Can only have 2 of those. So we gotta figure out what we have potentially that we can have an extra copy of. Okay. What's the other problem? Let's see, we can only have 1 of these. Can only have 1 of these. So this is really just a completely different deck that I'd have to build. I think that's pretty much it. And there's not like a random thing you can add here either. The thing I guess you'd probably want to run into is probably just see if you can find some Zodiac cards to just throw in here quickly so we can just play. Let's not take those two. Let's take these two. Actually, let's take these two. Which that probably won't help me with anything, but whatever. What do I still have too much of? Finally. I definitely am in this weird position right now where I'm frustrated with Yu-Gi-Oh, but I'm also so tired and low energy that I really can't express my frustration. I'm just, I guess, outright exhausted with it. And I've been playing nearly an hour now, and I've not yet accomplished a single thing. Which, compare that to, say, one of the mobile games I'm playing, like Star Trek Lower Decks or Memento Mori. Both of those games have a high level of autoplay features in them. They pretty much always play themselves. If there was a case, and it would be interesting to see a card game do this in particular, but if there was a case where your deck, your best deck, was playing itself when you were away from keyboard and when you were out of the app against bots, and as you level up your proficiency or some other dual rank, you start to get small bits of rewards as far as a currency to get packs, that would be great. That would really be great. Instead of having it all focused around just daily quest and then having to play. But a card-based auto battler game is not something I've ever seen. It'd be an interesting experiment, certainly. It feels like something like Marvel Snap that could be fairly experimental and fairly interesting. Marvel Snap, in some situations, isn't too far off from being an auto battler, because there are some cards that where it just plays for you anyways. So if Marvel Snap introduced this idea that your deck, whatever deck you build, the best deck you can build is giving you some amount of currency even when you're not playing, that'd be interesting. Yes, that is antithetical to the overall goal of making people play more, but when you see games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, they've already achieved that goal far too much in that they've gotten people to play. And there's just a different breed of your average collectible card game player who wants to play maybe 2 or 3 hours every couple days, and someone who's obsessed with collectible card games and wants to play for 4 or 5 hours on a daily basis, or even 4 or 5 hours on a weekly basis. I'd say your average collectible card game player, though, would be a group of friends on a Friday night spending 3 or 4 hours playing games, though. So once 4 or 5 hours per week. So the daily quests are already way past that in expectations. Moving on with the news, GameDeveloper.com says the next version of Unity will be called Unity 6. Unity is adjusting its naming conventions for future versions of the software and rolling out public access to generative AI tools. There was some interesting announcements around, I believe, Unity 5, or whatever the last version of Unity was called. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually was Unity 3, and they're trying to double the number. That would be kind of a great place to double the number though, is to say, hey, we're going from Unity 3 to Unity 6 because Asians don't like the number 4, and see it as unlucky, and this catches us up. I wouldn't be surprised if Unity really didn't have naming conventions so much. For the most part, I've only heard of the Unity engine being referred to as the Unity engine, and while there may have been number updates, of course, the big problem here with Unity is not the software, not the interesting features that they might announce. The problem there is that you have some terrible marketing and terrible public relations happening with Unity. Honestly, I could have potentially tribute summoned here. I'm not sure if that's really what I'm activating or not. A Dragon's Dogma 2 showcase is coming this month. A game was recently raided in Saudi Arabia, which I assume what this means is that there's... There we go, we finally got that tribute summon. Second time's the charm. I kind of would have thought that Dragon's Dogma already existed as a game, or Dragon's Dogma 2 as a game already existed, but and had been released, but apparently not. As far as Black Friday sales go, we'll kind of go over them fairly quickly. So far, I really haven't seen anything that looks great. We are in this weird position where, yes, it makes sense to buy certain games, whereas paying £10, since this is from Video Games Chronicle, for Forspoken for the PS5 is still probably not worth it. But getting any kind of console, unless your console is just broken, is a rougher argument. You're probably pretty safe buying an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5. You're not very safe at all, in my opinion, if you're buying a Nintendo Switch. It looks like the Steam Deck OLED sounds like it's selling fairly well. But yeah. And there is a decent argument around buying that if you're going to buy anything this Christmas season, even though that is very, very expensive. It feels like a lot of Christmases, my recommendation to a lot of people is to save your money, but it also kind of feels like that advice is never going to be listened to by most people, and even if you did save your money, it almost feels like what for? There's no guarantee that the economic situation, your personal economic situation, will be any better next year. So yeah, this may be the best bet. Do I think by this time next year a PlayStation 6 or an Xbox Series X will be announced? No, not really. They might tease some things, but we're increasingly just not able to afford the next step of technological improvements, which would be just a smaller nanometer chip, faster chips with more threads, more cores. The technology exists even now to theoretically make a twice as powerful Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, but it would probably miss out on some optimizations and some new technologies, whereas just twice as powerful without any new features, no ray tracing or other gimmick to sell the game on, is a new console on. It's going to be rough. I seriously doubt the next Xbox and next PlayStation are going to try and sell themselves on gimmicks like VR or AR, which then leaves them to find yet another gimmick. At the moment, you would almost assume that there would be some AI gimmick in the next consoles, the next big expensive consoles at least, and some of that makes some sense. I could see Microsoft in particular trying to have a voice activated ChatGPT type software that you could just talk to and ask for help on the game, or just get responses from that way. So remember, I'm playing ranked here, and I'm obviously going to lose. So I had to sacrifice a loss in ranked, where you really can't sacrifice losses to just get the dumb proficiency test done, which immediately changes deck back to Zodiac Tri-Brigade, because I don't want any chance whatsoever. So I need 4 more wins now to go up to that. Which, by the way, I should be doing the ritual thing this whole time. So they've just added yet another thing here to waste your time. Alright. The clear condition here is competing in the duel and destroy a card 10 times. That's not anywhere as difficult. The reward is a icon I'll never use. Let's take the practical exam. Time for no reason. 3 out of 5 questions. What's the name of this card? Book of the Moon. I'm gonna say apparently it is Book of Taiyu. This shield is being destroyed in the illustration of, let's see, Millennium Shield. Wouldn't be surprised if Taiyu is Japanese for the moon. Which of the following statements about mates is incorrect? Every mate has an original card. Let's go with that. On which card is the card text? A skeletal ghost isn't strong, but can mean big trouble in large numbers. Let's go with Skull Servant. Just because that's the oldest card. What's the name of this card? Let's go with Chirometric Overjack. So yeah, mostly random guessing. So this is Book of Taiyu, this is Book of the Moon, this is Book of the Eclipse, and this is Book of the Lunar Eclipse, and they're all just slight variations on each other. And so this is the Millennium Shield being destroyed here with Shield Crush. So there was originally this whole idea of cards interacting with each other and a narrative being told. I think that's pretty much been dropped at this point. Then now they're asking questions about the flavor text at the bottom that has nothing to really do with how the card is actually played. Although there is a trick here in that the default response without knowing anything should have always been this, because only normal cards have flavor text, so that you didn't really have to know any of these cards in particular. And then here we have Super Strident Blaze, which looks very similar to Evolution in Burst, which looks somewhat similar to Evolution Burst, and doesn't look anywhere close to Chimera Takeover Dragon. But it's, again, I think supposed to be the same card, which almost certainly all these cards are just based off of a character in one of the anime series. I very quickly want to be done with this proficiency test so it stops being an issue. Meanwhile, though, I was supposed to be focusing on playing this and not getting anywhere here. I really can, at most, play 1 or 2 games here, and then I'm really just going to need to focus on the news. GameDeveloper.com here has an article about the Steam Deck OLED saying that an analyst says it is an important, if not essential, hardware update. The introduction of a revised Steam Deck device maker Valve reference reinforces its leadership in the handheld gaming PC market. And yeah, there definitely isn't an argument there really isn't an argument that any of the other Windows-based portable PC gaming handhelds are doing anything as far as being successful. But yeah. See, we'll go ahead and just special summon this, and we'll do it by tossing this. Then we can just return this. Then in the turn. Here they're saying that Steam Deck sales were slowing year over year since the beginning of the second 2023. That's probably, H is probably means the fiscal second quarter. And then yeah, you can see that. I guess the idea here is that the pink here is when the Steam Deck was first announced, and then you got a very high amount to the point where, in this point, I imagine they plateaued because they couldn't sell anymore. And then in the next year, you had a fairly high amount, and then it started to go down, and then you have the 20th anniversary sale when it brought interest back into that, and then the LCD model clearance peaked it up too. Although again, the sales here might be low because it was just not available. So it's questionable if this information is even accurate. There's an estimation here, I would guess, that close to 3.5 million units have been sold globally. Okay, what do we want to do? Let's just do this. See, this is the worst. The lesser ritual summon, because it requires characters on the field to be tributed. Although, I don't know if you'd actually call that a tribute summon as much as you'd call that a ritual summon, and the word tribute there might be the wrong word to use. Ark Survival Ascended, despite a decent amount of controversy, has topped 600,000 sales units sold in 2 weeks after its Steam launch. This title, being billed as a reimagining of Ark Survival Evolved, is currently in early access mode. Now is how they're describing early access. Ark Survival Ascended's main controversy being that they removed the original version of Ark Survival, Ark Survival Evolved, the first game, and I don't believe Ark Survival 2 is out yet. 600,000 sales is still a decent amount of sales, but it definitely isn't a great amount of sales for a title that could have been bigger. It definitely feels like it's a title that could be a lot bigger. Of course, you could always make that argument. GameDeveloper.com also has this article, how Baldur's Gate 3 character creator brings modern flair to an old school fantasy. And there is something to that, although in fairness, your traditional MUDs and MMOs tended to always be at the forefront of having character creators. Unfortunately, the problem is that almost every character creator game then zooms the camera out and you never see the character again, or even worse, you have something like Fallout, where you create a character and then you're in first-person perspective for the entirety of the game after that. So creating your character visually doesn't really matter. But yeah. One of the sales pitches that I think we're going to see with games increase, and we're seeing even now quite a bit, is that you're going to have more variety and around more realistic character hair face creators go. Noticeably, you have different colored eye pupils here, which is kind of interesting. This hair definitely looks better than previous generations of hair rendering. Hair tech still needs improvement, I imagine. But yeah, character creators getting it right in a Dungeons and Dragons style game, like Baldur's Gate 3, which I think is literally based off of Dungeons and Dragons, is definitely in line with the idea of playing Dungeons and Dragons in the real world and then having a drawing that you drew of your character or something like that. Valve also celebrating the 25th anniversary of Half-Life with a update. They've added 7 multiplayer maps to Half-Life, including 4 brand new ones called Contamination, Pool Party, Disposal, and Rocket Frenzy. The game's been updated with Steam networking support, so jumping on a server this weekend is easier than it's ever been. They've added something to Half-Life Death Watch. Lost content, including Half-Life Uplink standalone demo. I feel like there was also a documentary that they announced. Valve directly really has been just reposting things. Before then, Valve only really talks from their Valve Twitter account when they want to. Yeah. Look behind the scenes with the original development team and more at halflife.com/halflife25. Let's just click on that and see if they have anything interesting to say. This is going to be the last game I play, and it's just going to be pathetic amount of progress. So what you want to do is use this one, because we're going to have to sacrifice this guy anyways. Yeah. I might have actually accomplished the tribute just by playing this deck, but it didn't feel like I was accomplishing that. So the Half-Life website just has this Half-Life logo. Then I guess scroll down. I've never played Half-Life, and so it would definitely be rough. I guess the documentary is just a YouTube video, which is fair enough. And then highlighting what the updates do. Updated graphics and settings, but it's not going to be that updated. Now, the question here, Steam Deck support, definitely is going to be a focus. But the question here is, why would you play this when the fan-made mod that completely remade all the visuals of Half-Life 1 exists? Like, Black Mesa, I think is the name of that fan game. It is also on Valve things. On Steam. I guess there probably is a decent enough people to... There probably is a decent amount of people who still have nostalgia for Valve and Half-Life that they would want to play the originals. Very noticeably though, what's not being mentioned here is any new Half-Life content. No Half-Life 2 Episode 3, no Half-Life 3, no reboot, full-on reboot of the series. Any of those would be acceptable. But yeah. There's probably somewhere close to 15 years difference between the release date of Episode 2 and Half-Life Alyx, and Half-Life Alyx only came out because it was a VR game, which they could at the very least say, hey, let's remove the VR requirement from Half-Life Alyx and see if we could get more people playing Half-Life Alyx as an experience, even if it would be a lesser experience. And there's just no limitation here at all, so we could 5 years from now be at the 30th anniversary of Half-Life 1 and still have no reason to believe that a Half-Life 3 would be announced or come out. Although, eventually, I suspect what's going to happen, if nothing else happens, is you'll have just Gabe Newell retire. He's pretty old. It would make a lot of sense for him to completely retire. And then his involvement with Half-Life 3 goes away. And then you could have other people, lesser known, who are shareholders in the secret dark council that runs Valve, for lack of a better explanation of how their infrastructure actually is. But you could see those older people retire, and you could see people who either genuinely have a passion and want to make a Half-Life 3, or just don't care at all and just want to cash out making a Half-Life 3. And either one would be fine, I think. You've lowered the standards so much as far as Half-Life that just putting out anything called Half-Life 3 just to go forward is the right decision. Doesn't matter if it's if it's 5 times worse than Duke Nukem Forever, even. Ruin the series and then reboot it. Or don't ruin the series, but just make something that's mediocre and move forward to a Half-Life 4. Here's another story. Apparently EA's Rocket Arena has been suddenly delisted from digital PC stores. This was a 2000 online store. By the way, Half-Life 1 is free on Steam if you want to get it. If for some reason you don't have it already. Pretty much any Steam sale, almost the first thing you should buy is the Valve Complete Pack. It's going to be usually discounted very highly, and it's going to make a lot of sense to buy that, even if you're only going to play Portal and Portal 2. Alright, and thus ends our pathetic gameplay for today. We did finish this one, make progress on this one, and I guess we probably made a couple games worth of progress on this one, and this one is completely finished. As far as daily quests go, nothing really happened. So yeah, I don't know about Rocket Arena, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is yet another game that they are getting rid of because nobody really cares that much about it, and it is potentially just yet another game that costs too much to maintain the servers on, and video game companies' finances need to be rethought as far as ongoing server costs. But an average accountant for many other industries is going to look at that and go, we have no reason to maintain this service, let's shut down the servers. There is also this issue where everybody has been trying for years now to make a live service online game that people play forever, and only a few top 5 games like that succeed. And if you have something like Counter-Strike Go, which I guess they're calling Counter-Strike 2 now, and you wanted to sell something else, you're potentially going to try and get rid of any competition, even if the competition is your own game from a few years ago. And so EA may very well think that shutting down Rocket Arena allows them to make something similar to Rocket Arena, but hopefully slightly better, or it just allows them to push more people to play other games that they are more interested in. GameDeveloper.com says, Code My Crown guide released for black hairstyles in games. This open source hair library and Dove made a free game guide for developers looking to implement more black hairstyles. So Dove Soap, we've seen this before where Dove Soap is trying to just get somebody to talk about Dove soap, and so they're doing something weird and somewhat SJWE. Although, in all fairness, I can't really call this that SJWE at all, because there has been consistent problems with hair rendering in general, and there's been consistent lack of attempts to make fancier, more interesting hairstyles, which typically are on the heads of black people, but in general they could be on the heads of green people and blue people and white people too, and just more hairstyles would be better. Of course, the hair technology has been a limitation, but the bigger limitation is definitely, if you go by statistics and say about 20% of US citizens are of African descent, there's not 20% of animators in video games that are of African descent. There's a lack of what would be the right percentage, or the average percentage of all other things are equal. And even if the animators were in that percentage, the managers, and particularly the Japanese things, we really have to come down and say a big reason why you see not that many black characters is because Asians have a certain level of racism against Africans and people with black skin. They don't see them on day-to-day basis, so they don't think about it, so there's that level. When they do see them, they're such an oddity that it feels weird to a Japanese person to put in a black character. It feels either exotic, and they're exoticizing and making it a celebration in their mind, instead of just treating the characters like normal characters that would be there all together. And yeah, so a lot of it really comes from Asian influence when you're talking Asian games. Western games made in the United States don't have that same excuse. It's still probably under the category of racism, but just assuming something about a race. But racism means something very different to an Asian when they're thinking of blacks than US people. But then there is also the hair technology issue. You can definitely see it in like this case where they're effectively making a me, and where the hairstyle falls completely apart at that point and does not look like anything that is realistic. This looks like you've got a 3D CGI Wii or me with just a black raspberry fruit stuck to the back of their head. It's night and day difference for the amount of curly differences and things. Yeah, white people, basic statement to say white people tend to have straighter hair, whereas Africans genetically tend to have curlier hair, which creates different styles. There's been way too much talk, I would say, about black people's hair in general. A lot of it should be positive, and a lot of it I think is, but then there's definitely talks about how any of these hairstyles on a white character would get at least some armchair activist online complaining. Whereas that's another issue. Certainly it's probably an unfair issue. I don't think your average black person cares if they saw another person with cornrows or an afro or anything like that. There are also some hairstyles that are just not in style anymore, such as afros. Those used to be a huge thing. I saw Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek Lower Decks, the mobile game I'm playing, and And she used to have a big afro in the original Star Trek TV series, and now they have retconned her to not have a big afro, which feels weird. Yeah, they're quoting here, I don't know where they're getting it from, that 80% of black gamers believe the video game poorly represents textured hair. 70% of developers want to promote and learn how to code better textured hair in games. This library certainly can help in some instances, but to get the guide you have to download it, and then bet this isn't just going to open. Oh, it is. Dub being involved though really means nothing. And probably don't have time to go through all of this, but it would be interesting as far as what is the real code here. Yeah, download the guide. So there's a guide, and this is just a landing page. See, Dove is used Zelda Breath of the Wild there in their ad, and I wouldn't be surprised if this gets DMCA'd by Nintendo, though I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, these are some great examples of terrible hair in general. There's a real danger, though, certainly, too, about running into a stereotype of being too obsessed about your hair or talking about your hair of any race, you know. This definitely feels like one of these projects that was probably pitched first and foremost by Dove and saying, how can we take this idea and turn it into a real thing when it originally wasn't a real thing. In the vast amount of cases, though, most of these hairstyles would struggle to look good in a video game. It's just too many textures, it's too many reflections. It is going to look a lot more like this than what you really would want. But I'd like to see game developers try. But I would definitely say I'd much prefer to see more black characters in, like, the most recent Final Fantasy game is a kind of a great example. That was set in the medieval time. I feel like you could have definitely created a case where there were some black characters in that world, strong black characters, independent, free black characters even in that world, in that time frame. And that's just something we really aren't seeing too much of. Some of it definitely comes down to pandering too. You'll see a lot more Asian characters because they're trying to sell games to Chinese markets. When, yeah, it should probably be closer to equal numbers. But generally, when I think of, like, Barack Obama being the first African descent president of the United States, I don't think about his hairstyle. I don't care about his hairstyle one bit. If he had a big afro like he did back when afros were big, I wouldn't have cared. And if he had dreadlocks, I wouldn't have cared. Oh, speaking of dreadlocks, apparently Snoop Dogg, this isn't video game related, announced that he was giving up smoke, is what he called it. Smoking, I assume. I doubt that means he's giving up weed, and he's probably moving to edibles. I wouldn't be surprised if the mass amount of just smoking in general has hurt him in some way, given him lung cancer or something else, was the speculation. He asked for privacy at this time. Of course, as a celebrity, he's not going to really get it. He's very old, and in fairness, the last time I saw him in a movie, he looked pretty awful, like leathery skin, which is a common side effect of a hard life of smoking. I wouldn't be surprised if he's also just getting so old that mentally being high is not healthy for him. He really is very much like Cheech and Chong, a one-note, one-gimmick character. It would be interesting to see him spread out and address other topics more. Back to video games. This Donald Mustard has joined a movie production company, AGBO. Mustard's involvement with AGBO was preceded by his relationship with the company's founders, Avengers director Joe and Anthony Russo. He was part of Epic Games before, so really, at a certain point, he's not. This isn't video game news. This is somebody who was either laid off or left Epic Games, moving over to Hollywood, which really is a step downward in my opinion, not a step up. But yeah, we'll see if that leads to any more news. It probably won't. Half-Life hit 14,000 concurrent players with the 25th anniversary update, which, okay. And then Steam Deck in general, they put out a new update for the Steam Deck. They updated the Windows FAQ with an updated APU driver for the Steam Deck OLE. They're still working on Windows drivers for the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and audio. So an updated version if you installed Windows on the Steam Deck, which I don't know why you would do that. Half-Life now being Steam Deck verified. SteamOS 3.5.5. Improved default colors for Steam Deck LCD, additional display settings, and support for the Steam Deck OLED. They also got the Bluetooth remote wake up working a little bit now, although it seems to me like it probably has some problems still. And then you can see on the 16th they had a little bit of struggle selling things on that launch day, but not a huge amount of struggle. Let's see. Sega of America is accused of trying to cut 40% of unionized workers. Union members claimed that the Sonic maker is clearly engaging in, quote, bad faith bargaining, which, yeah. The phrase bad faith bargaining and good faith bargaining all are dumb phrases in general. Undoubtedly, Sega of America doesn't want a union, even if they pretend like they do. And Sega, being a Japanese company, probably doesn't want a union either. So, yeah. In the end, this kind of pushback and this kind of inside baseball stuff is not very informative or helpful for gamers. Like, we'll see how successful the Allied Employees Guild improving Sega, or Aegis, is going to be, which is a specific Communication Workers of America local 9510. We'll see how successful they are and how successful they aren't. At the end of the day, trying to cut 40% of unionized workers is not that different than any other company that doesn't have a union, which has laid off 30%, 40% of their employees. And that seems very much in line with the way things are just going right now, where I have no idea why these tabs are opening every now and then. That's really just in line with the way things are going, though, is that people are just trying to lay off people left and right. We have a Video Games Chronicle article here saying Mass Effect veteran Mac Walters is leading a new NetEase studio in Canada. Worlds Untold is making a AAA action-adventure game with the emphasis on narrative, which maybe is something like a Mass Effect competitor. It would make a lot of sense to, instead of trying to make a new Mass Effect game, just make a game like Mass Effect, maybe change the settings. There really is nothing that would suffer that much if all of a sudden Mass Effect was popular enough to make an argument that they should make some kind of fantasy game to compete against Skyrim or the Elder Scrolls next game, which will probably take too long. I could see direct competition where creators of Mass Effect make a career of making games that are slightly different, slightly better, or better received than Starfield or Skyrim. The main issue here, though, is that there's not really a direct connection here, and this is kind of a weird time to announce this, but it's not that weird of a time, because if you're announcing this company starting right now, you're gonna take probably 4 years to make a game. In 4 years, the next Elder Scrolls game probably will be out. In 4 years, a Starfield 2 could be out, and yeah, a Mass Effect 4 probably will be out, so you're gonna have some competition there, just off the top of my head. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Target revealed its Black Friday deals. Again, it's kind of hard to justify anything other than just buying video games. I am completely turned off the idea of buying TVs on Black Friday at this point. It seems like we probably, even at Target, I know it happens at Walmart that they sell special models specifically for Black Friday that are missing features and are lower quality, but even at Target, I wouldn't be surprised if they also have special models specifically for the Black Friday season that are just really, really cheap. Like, you have a 70-inch TV here selling for $300, Westinghouse Roku TV. I suspect that is a TV that might break within just about a year, which is the last TV I bought did break in a year, and I've never had a TV break after a year, and I've never had a company be refuse to repair a TV because I've never had a TV break in the first place. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend TCL in particular because of that incident. But yeah, in general, I'm not recommending buying TVs right now. I just don't think it's a good time. A lot of the things that go on sale on Black Friday are not anywhere close to the time in which you really should be buying something. Like, TVs aren't close to the point where new TVs would be announced, where you would have a general idea of what the next generation of TVs are. Even if you're not going to buy a next generation, you'll know if there's a big difference or if there's a small difference between last year's model and this year's model. So there's an argument there too. The NVIDIA Shield, which hasn't changed really at all since it came out many years ago, is still fairly expensive on sale at $160. But if you want a Google TV product other than a Chromecast, it's kind of your only bet particularly if you're going to try and hack or sideload on something like that. Whereas the Amazon TV products are very possibly going to go away from Google TV and Android being Android based at all, which is just going to lock you more into Amazon TV, Amazon.com in general, which I don't look forward to that idea. Here we have a Video Games Chronicle article saying that Embracer has confirmed that 900 employees were let go in its second quarter. It's quite a lot of employees, although we often get percentages versus numbers, and so it's hard to figure out the difference. Here we have Unity saying Unity 6 will bring performance enhancements, accelerated multiplayer, game creation, web, GPU support, and deeper XR device support in 2024. Yeah. They, on their YouTube page, they talked about more of the in the weeds details as what Unity could do, but there's improving on. Although what happens a lot of time too is that the announcements for Unity and the Unreal Engine come out nearly back to back, and then I'll confuse one thing. Unity Cloud is being introduced, version control integration, easy workflows between your Unity editors, Cloud, and Unity game services. It is kind of crazy that a lot of coding, even now, is best done with just having two people sitting next to each other as far as your collaborative programming, that there isn't a way for the software itself to integrate into each other without just uploading everything to a GitHub or a Git repository and using that more difficult to learn. But yeah, as we scroll back here, we still have runtime charges being the main thing that they're talking about, and overshadowing any new announcements almost certainly. And I imagine as far as refurbished units, we're still completely out of refurbished units. Probably aren't ever going to see any more refurbished units. See, now part of the reason why you would see the source software development kit jump up here in this list is because it is used in Half-Life 1, I suspect, as far as the source engine goes. That being said, I think part of the other problem here is that this chart just does not stay where it should be, because once I clicked it and got these numbers going in the order they should be going, I almost figure I need to reprogram this macro. It's a slow macro to get all the information. I need to probably reprogram it to work in parallel or something. But yeah, we're still seeing the top 10 barely hitting 100,000 units being played. So either people are just playing less games, or it's being spread out quite more. And yeah, if Half-Life is supposed to be somewhere in this chart, it must be fairly low, because I'm not really seeing it in the top 100. Maybe people tried Half-Life with the new update and then stopped playing after one day. yeah. At a certain level, these most played games also create a weird situation where multiplayer games have a reason why a lot more people would be playing it versus single player games. But yeah, as far as my chart goes, Arca Blade Point apparently missed some information in the last day. We're seeing a little bit of a bump in Apex Legends in some of these games, but yeah, at the moment my chart is fairly useless. I just need to find some extra time to adjust it to get well below 100,000, and I'll need to remove this day's worth of data points so these points connect, which isn't really that big of a deal when you only have 4 or 5 games to even mention. As far as the Steam page, we have the OLED Steam Deck being here. We're seeing full price Steam Dock being sold and promoted. Inherently, I thought they said this was algorithmic, but I'm not sure this really is algorithmic. Or this may just be a case of Valve cheating the system, which undoubtedly that they do cheat the system for their own games. You would just assume that they did. But yeah, this is not algorithmic to have a front page. Visit the point shop for new Steam startup movies, which there is definitely some concern there. You can see recently updated Half-Life 1 is free right now. Already in my library, obviously. It is slightly concerning, though, that Valve might get too crazy and start to make way too many startup movies, which just don't really need to exist in the first place, because inherently the startup screen and the boot up of the Steam Deck should become instantaneous for the most part, or seen so incredibly rare that it doesn't matter. And they are making work towards that, to a suspend wake up state in Steam Deck, where you'd never really shut down your computer, your Steam Deck, and instead would just put it to a deep sleep. And yeah, I guess that would be the next big technological thing to push all PCs to. It'd be nice if all PCs did it, but particularly the Steam Deck, is to have a non-volatile RAM of some sort that was better than Windows Hibernate as far as putting a computer to sleep and then instantaneously waking it up. Let's see. The only difference here is the anti-glare etched glass, which for $100 I think you could probably leave that off, and stick with 512 gigabytes, you probably leave that off. But inherently, $550 is quite a lot to ask. But I can't really justify going down to $400 for the 256 version. And the limited edition, I assume, is probably already just completely missing from this page. Yeah, I don't see a button here for a limited edition. We just need the price to go down a lot more to justify this, as far as the 64 gigabyte LCD version. one of the things that might be the case, it's not the case right now, is that you might in the future be able to get the 64 gigabyte LCD version cheap and then get an upgrade kit that adds the exact same OLED screens to it, and then do that way cheaper than adding $300 more to it. If you only cared about the OLED version, which is really not what I would want. My concern to slightly have here, yeah, I guess you have to just click this available now to get the limited edition. They're not really telling you the price there. Let's see what it says. $679. So it's not that big of a deal difference in price. $30 difference for the plastic case, effectively. Which arguably, I bet the plastic here is more likely to break than the plastic by default. Yeah, I would much prefer to have a non-OLED version that's cheaper, that has the new 6nm APU and bigger battery, and I bet that's going to happen once they sell out of all the old stock. And I wouldn't be surprised if this time in 6 months or so we get yet another refresh in which they're going to come out with an LCD version of the new OLED version that is going to have 6nm and the new Wi-Fi and the bigger battery. Maybe it won't have the 90 Hz refresh rate, but that would be about the only real problem there. I wouldn't be surprised if I can find an LCD version that is 7.4 instead of 7 inches diagonal. So if I could get all the internal improvements with possibly even better battery life because it's an LCD, although actually OLEDs probably are more power efficient than LCDs are, generally speaking. I'd be willing to compromise there. And honestly, I'd be willing to compromise on the Wi-Fi 5 versus Wi-Fi 6E. There really isn't that big of a difference there either. Depends on just how much you're installing and uninstalling games. One of the updates on SteamOS also is now it automatically auto mounts external drives. So if you have a dock with a USB hard drive plugged into it full of games, now you don't have to install a custom mod script every time there, which that makes a lot of sense. That is one of the slick deals I have seen, is there's like an 18 terabyte external USB hard drive that would be more than enough space to put tons of ROMs, tons of games on there, and just leaving them on the hard drive when it's a ROM is perfectly fine because they're so small. Typically speaking, you're not going to run into loading issues. So you could have a device that, when docked, can access a lot of old games, and then you can keep just your favorites or games that need faster speed. There is faster RAM in the Steam OLED version too, so it makes a lot of sense to have an LCD version with faster RAM. Let's try and burn through all the news fairly quickly because I was moving very slow. Embracer doesn't deny that Free Radical is a closure risk, which is to basically say nothing. Amazon Black Friday deals, we kind of had already looked at them. Spire claims that Knights of the Old Republic 2 Switch DLC was cancelled because of a third-party objection. A class action lawsuit was launched due to the DLC's cancellation. Interesting. So I wonder what the third party is. Are you talking Nintendo or Disney? Because Aspire Media is claiming it's somebody, and I don't know who the other third party could be unless somebody somehow convinced Nintendo that Knights of the Old Republic 2 was infringing on the copyright of some other software, which maybe that could be the case. Dragon's Dogma 2's release date has seemingly been leaked. March 22nd, 2024 is the rumored release date. Standard PS5 console drops to the lowest UK price yet in an early Black Friday deal. The PS5 disc model will be available standalone for £379 or bundled with a game for £390, which 20 extra pounds for a game sounds good, but I'm not 100% sure what the pound to US dollar transfer rate is now. More PlayStation Plus Classic titles have seemingly leaked. Check out this article if you actually care. Then we talked about Spyro the Dragon. And the next free Epic Game Store titles have been revealed. Deliver Us Mars will be replacing Surviving the Aftermath and Earthlock, which are both now free. Dragon's Dogma Showcase coming this month. More hints that Dragon's Dogma is close to being released. PlayStation's Black Friday sales live with discounts over 1,000 products. There is, I guess, an argument to consider there to go all digital, although some of these bundles are still fairly expensive. Like, if you really already had a lot of digital games and you were just planning that the PlayStation 6 would be all digital anyways, if you're just gonna give up on ever really having any good discounts, then going all digital and buying a Black Friday PlayStation sale might make some sense. But then it feels very defeatist. And if you are going to go all digital, just go to PC gaming and Steam, where things are a lot cheaper anyways. And particularly for PlayStation, a lot of the PlayStation games are getting released on Steam. It would make more sense to go all digital on Xbox. Xbox Black Friday digital sale is up now with up to 95% off over 1,000 games. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these games are overlapping too. Some of these games are fairly old. Mirror's Edge Catalyst is not really the Mirror's Edge you would want to play. Mass Effect Andromeda, a lot of these games are not particularly great. A little bit of a discount on Diablo 4 if you're interested in that. The PS5 version of The Last of Us Part 2 reportedly has been added to the PlayStation database, which, yeah, I imagine it's going to be a very minimal remaster on the visuals, if even that, if it actually comes out. And then Forspoken has been discounted to less than to £8, less than a year after its release, which you don't tend to see these kind of fire sales for bad games, but we probably should. There's still really no reason why you'd want to play Forspoken even at that price, though. Even if it was free, you probably wouldn't want to play Forspoken. It's just not relevant. Like, it is going to be a game that if somehow you found some great enjoyment in it, you couldn't really sing the praises of that game because nobody else would find that enjoyment in it. So yes, I guess you could have your own private fun with that if that's all you care about, which most gamers probably should only care about that, but most gamers do tend to want to be somewhat in the in crowd and on the right side of the mob vote. As a video game critic, it doesn't make any sense for me to play a game like this, even if it was free, because the consumer advice around it is already obvious. You should not buy Forspoken. You should not play Forspoken. It's a shame Forspoken wasn't a better game. Forspoken weirdly is one of those characters with more of an African style hairstyle, and or at least more of an interesting hairstyle, and that didn't really do anything for the game, but probably didn't hurt the game either. A Baldur's Gate 3 is getting a physical edition on the Xbox Series X and PC and PS5. This $80 set will include a soundtrack, map, and other physical and digital extras. This is a lot of collectibles, certainly. Kind of glad that this year we've seen less and less of the limited edition, the deluxe edition nonsense, but it still exists to a decent level. And that's going to bring us to the Komatsu articles. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R has a new DLC character, Wonder of You, being announced. What is this on? Let's see. I didn't have my thing enabled. Oh yeah, I was trying to see if I could get a refund for that DLC, and as far as I can tell, I didn't buy the European DLC. I must have gotten it for free, because I finding a way to even get a refund on a game on Steam is way more difficult than it probably should be. But yeah, I brought up my entire purchase history and searched for Ticket to Ride European Edition, and nothing came up around that. So I must have just been gifted the game or gotten it for free or something. So I'm not going to worry about it. Even if I did spend like $5 on it, it's not worth the effort. Arizona Sunshine 2 has a gameplay showcase, cross-platform co-op modes being announced. You want to check that out on Komatsu. A roguelike action game, Realm of Ink, has been announced for consoles and PCs. Let's see what this looks like. It's not incredibly impressive, and a big part of that is it's zoomed out a little too much. Some of these visuals here do look interesting, but yeah, it feels like they just want too many enemies on screen, and thus they've zoomed out too far. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth details calm and under Junon characters, playable Red 13, synergy, abilities, skills, and more. Yep. Final Fantasy 13 is another game that probably would benefit if they threw in some more characters that were black, of African descent, or, well, in fantasy games like this you just really have to call them black. But as a Japanese game, it's kind of unlikely. You do have this character, certainly, but it's hardly 20% of all of the characters you run into. And then you also run into the problem if you take a well-known, already established character and just race swap them, then that's controversial and unacceptable in many cases. So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in particular is one of the few games that actually is in a situation, since they are changing the story, where they could introduce a new character without just race swapping existing characters. A game called Everlasting Flowers launches June 27th, 2024. This is a visual novel for PC, PS4, and Switch, it looks like. Dragon's Dogma Showcase, we already talked about, set for November 28th. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth details its battle system, job change system, character exclusive jobs, and new jobs. Which, having so many different job systems probably indicates to me that I never really would want to play a game like this. I think this is the series that a lot of your experience is running around doing dumb odd jobs. It's kind of funny to take a game that's all about you playing as a gangster and then boil it down to a Japanese style love of overworking yourself or obsession with work. There's quite a few characters here being shown. And it kind of looks like you can play as all these different characters. It more feels like it's a turn-based RPG game in general, from what they're showing. A free-to-play multiplayer social deduction game called Illang has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, PC, iOS, and Android, notably ignoring the older Xboxes and PS4s. Feels like Gamatsu is getting worse about having Steam links, which may mean they just aren't making Steam links that early. A game called The Starbites Taste of the Desert launches in 2024 for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. I imagine we're going to start seeing this more and more often. Just the latest PS5, the latest Xbox, and PC. And I imagine we are also going to see a increase in games being announced generically for 2024. Rusta's Moss is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch in the spring of 2024 alongside a major update. Let's see if this game is already on the fall list. It is. And it is rated very positively, so I can just go ahead and put it on the wish list. And I can get it to actually work. Princess Maker 2 Regeneration has been delayed to May 30th of 2024, no longer due December 21st of 2023. The weirdest part about this, though, is that it feels like it was only maybe a year and a half ago that they re-released Princess Maker 2 anyways. So there's a somewhat large question in my mind as to, did they really need to make Regeneration, and does Regeneration actually do anything to actually remaster the Princess Maker 2 game? Guess I could read more about the game here. Let's see. Princess Maker 2 is a child rearing simulation game. In case you're not familiar with it, it's somewhat famous. Let's see. 30th anniversary, it was released in 1993. They're gonna redraw the graphics. The title is based on Princess Maker Refine, which was released in 2004. Oh my goodness. So that was like 9 years ago. Especially important graphics were redrawn by, I assume, the creator, Takami Akai, in a style similar to the PC 98 version. The graphics are drawn in high resolution, befitting modern game systems with a commitment to quality and details. So, here's Regeneration, here's Refine. So, this was one of those games where it really seems like they just redrew the images, although it's not really that big of a difference either. It's slightly duller color palette here, brighter color palette here, and maybe some different choices on what colors are used and the lighting. But as far as the actual objects, they're not changing much on the outfit. If anything, I think the argument as far as redoing the interface would make a lot more sense. And this may really be a case that they just needed to redraw it yet again to get to higher resolutions monitors. Seems like you can, by default, the original game probably stopped here in this square. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it stopped here. And they've added to the screen to make it widescreen, and they are showing all the stats you're trying to improve in the daughter that you're raising, which probably will make getting the multitude of different endings a lot easier. It's probably not the kind of game, though, that justifies having a delay when you're just reselling the same game once again. And it almost certainly says something about just where my brain has turned to mush that I think Refine came out a couple years ago and it was 9 years ago. That effectively means I was probably talking about it very close to when I first started my YouTube channel. Oh, speaking of my YouTube channel, YouTube sent me an email saying, hey, a bunch of your videos may or may not have been edited properly from old videos. Here's a attached CSV of videos that maybe I need to go and look and edit. I'll look at them and see what happens there. At a certain point, it's not my fault if they don't like the unedited version and then they revert it, edited it because of their own glitch. But they don't seem to be really too concerned about it. It may just be that there's some very old videos of mine that now don't have edits, which may suck. It looked like it was pretty much every single video I've ever edited on YouTube, which I don't do too much editing on YouTube. And good thing I didn't do a bunch of editing on YouTube. It's way better to just use OBS and pause the recording if you need to make a cut, and or use MKV or MP4 splitter or joiner. There's a software that splits the videos very quickly and joins them to make a cut. As far as other kinds of edits, I really don't do too much of that, although notably Honeypop did have blur edits added to it, so that the one game there might be completely edited at this unedited at this point. Although also the rules and guidance for adult content on Steam have kind of changed quite a bit since covering Honeypop also. Moving on, House Flipper 2 for PS5 and Xbox Series launches March 21st. The PC version launched December 14th. Which I assume we already have this on the follow list? Yes. Unicorn Overlord details allied characters, nations, and exploration. This isn't a game I don't recognize at all, though. Yes, there are a lot of games that look similar to this, and perhaps that's part of the problem, is that they all blur in my mind. Looking at these different characters, they seem to be a little too similar to each other. Feels like you would not really appreciate a lot of the characters, and since they're all kind of in this feudal outfit. Armor outfits. Then you've got these little chibi characters that this completely different style of gameplay. Yeah, way too many screenshots too for Komatsu. Komatsu is still consistently really putting out every single screenshot they get. But yeah, we're just scrolling. And this one's not even coming to PC, which might be another reason why I don't recognize it. Annapurna Interactive, let's pronounce that right. I hate their blurry logo. Has acquired 24-Bit Games, a technical game development studio based in South Africa. So another acquisition. Outcast: The New Beginning combat trailer is available if you want to check that out. This is the reboot of the Outcast series, or remake of the Outcast series. A Hitman Blood Money Reprisal for iOS and Android launches November 30th, which is kind of weird to basically take an old Hitman game and put it on mobile games instead of remastering it and putting it on consoles where it probably should be. NetEase establishing Worlds Untold, we already talked about. Arma Reforger is now available. It's an open world multiplayer first-person shooter, leaving early access. Let's see. That possibly is relevant enough that it deserves a YouTube short. Famitsu sales from the 6th to the 12th have been updated. We're seeing PS4 and PS5 versions of Like a Gaiden taking the 2nd and 3rd spot, and then Call of Duty for the PS5 taking the 4th spot, and Call of Duty for the PS4 taking the 6th spot, breaking Nintendo's almost stranglehold as far as Switch games in the top 10 spot for the first time in a long time. There's still a decent amount of Switch games in the top 10. And overall, Tales of Arise for the PS5, Double Dragon Collection for the Nintendo Switch, and Tales of Arise for the PS4. You even see this echoed in that this is very possibly the first time ever PlayStation 5 has outsold the Switch OLED model. And they, as far as overall sales, are getting closer. If we combine the Switch OLED model and the Lite and the regular model, you'd be at 64,000. You still wouldn't have beaten the PS5 sales, let alone PS5 Plus Digital Edition, which gets it over 100,000 units. So this was a very good week for PlayStation, and it almost certainly has to be from sales of Call of Duty and Like a Dragon, and games selling the system, not the system selling for any other reason. Black Friday, I assume, does happen in Japan, but I wouldn't imagine it's as big of a deal as it is in the West. Still getting Xbox Series X sales fairly high, beating the PS4, and still getting the occasional Nintendo 2DS LOL sales. Macross Shooting Insight has been delayed to March 14th. This is another great example of characters in kind of boring outfits. Tengoku Struggle Stray Side launches in April 2024 in the West. This looks like I guess it's a Young Maiden Otome visual novel. Weirdly, though, not sure if it's actually on Steam or if you have to buy it through this Access Games Online store. Yeah, it's launching for the Switch. It's not even on PC. Interesting. Under Night in Birth 2, Sis Celeste has its opening movie if you want to check that out. An isometric action-adventure game, Nocturne, for PC, launches November 28th. Increasingly, I never have time for watching the trailers, which is something I would like to do, but it's something beyond the scope of the amount of time I could invest into it. It's possible that if I had an editor, I could have them edit trailers on top of me talking, but it probably would not line up even at that if I tried that. NCSoft action-adventure game Project M G-Star trailer and screenshots are available. Well, this looks like something of interest. It's coming to consoles and PCs. Further details are due out November 17th. Kind of wouldn't be surprised if this turns into either a new series or if Project M turns into some kind of like Silent Hill game. If this is what Silent Hill looked like, that would be very interesting. What a new Silent Hill looked like. The NCSoft Collection RPG Project BSS G-Star 2023 trailer and screenshots are available. I assume G-Star is probably a presentation or an event. This game is less interesting looking. It looks like a mobile Asian RPG game. Looks fine, but isn't really knocking my socks off. NCSoft's open world MMO third-person shooty project LLL has its trailer and screenshots too. So all of these projects have just very generic names to them, which I would assume that they aren't going to stick to those generic names because that would be somewhat difficult to sell. Then a real-time strategy game called Project G has its trailer and screenshots. I don't know if I really believe that NCSoft has enough skill and manpower to make this many games at the same time, but they seem to be doing it. A game called Battle Crush has its G-Star 2023 trailer and screenshots, which would make me assume that since that doesn't say NCSoft, the G-Star event involved non-NCSoft people, but it's not true. Looking down here, this is also an NCSoft game. It does have a Steam link we've already looked at. NIS, or Nippon Ichi Software, is going to announce a new title on November 20th. This story has an update. Let's see, the video thumbnail has been updated with the following image. Not much of an update there. Metro Quester launches December 15th. This is the console version of a PC dungeon RPG. Let's see. This feels like this might be one of those ones where you were running around these subways or the underground subways. Nope, I'm thinking of a different game. This just looks awful. It's being received fairly well, but man, I just cannot sell myself on playing a game that looks this bad. So I'm not even going to promote it and make a YouTube short around it because it doesn't look good enough for that either. Demi's Reborn has a details, trailer, and screenshots. This looks a little bit higher resolution, colorful, JRPG type game. Looks like it might be a bit of a harem game where you're collecting anime girls to fight on your side. The actual game seems to drop down to this chibi art style, though, as they often do, which potentially means you don't get that many interesting visuals. And I didn't see a link to Steam here, so I'm gonna just have to assume that they don't have a Steam link. Maybe it's not coming to Steam at all. It says PC and smartphone, but I would lean towards assuming this is a smartphone first game. Inherently, that is the problem with any smartphone and PC game, is that it's kind of gotta be smartphone first, or you're gonna just make an awful smartphone version of a game that in no way compares to the PC version. Let's see, RF Online Next has details, trailers, and screenshots. This too is labeled as a PC and smartphone game. Looks like a different art style, more mech focused. And then Seven Deadly Sins Origin has its details, trailer, and screenshots if you want to check that out. I guess this will give me a slightly better understanding of what the game is. But yeah, I'm not really seeing anything amazing here. Not really. A Korean full motion video game called Motosolo, No Girlfriend Since Birth, is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch on November 30th. Let's see, it's available on Steam already. Let's see what the reception is on it. Well, very positive. That'll be an interesting one to make a YouTube short on. Then the first Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League Insider episode, story and gameplay, is available if you want to check that out. Although, at this point, I kind of feel like the Suicide Squad game has lost everyone's attention, and you run into the problem now that the Suicide Squad fandom, if there was ever any fandom, is probably dried up amongst several failed attempts to make Suicide Squad a thing that people cared about. And that's going to bring me to the GameDeveloper.com articles. We can probably jump through most of these. Germany creates a 100 million euro subsidiary to fund its game developers, which is interesting, but possibly not that much money, really. Over the next several years, Germany plans to properly support the local game development scene and increase its cultural footprint in the country. Inherently, though, Germany has been one of the most pro-censorship countries as far as video games go, of the countries that allow video games at all. China and Saudi Arabia being kind of examples of countries that barely allow games or don't allow games at all. So there's that problem. Then there is a question, certainly, as far as what German video game companies are there. You would say Daedalic, but Daedalic got purchased by Tencent, I believe. So would Tencent now be the recipient of Germany's 1 million subsidiary fund because they own a Daedalic? That probably isn't going to make Daedalic a better video game company, if Daedalic even still exists. I wouldn't be surprised if Daedalic actually doesn't exist. I'd have to go back and look at the latest things around Daedalic after making the Golem game. But yeah, as far as other German companies. I'm not sure I really can name any. Gamescom happens in Germany, certainly, but they wouldn't directly benefit from a 100 million euro subsidiary fund. So yeah, we'll just have to see how much a fund like that really benefits. It tends not to really benefit that much, and in general, countries picking and choosing what industries they support doesn't really get to the heart of them stimulating the economy the way they really would like to. Nowhere as much as just something like a universal basic income would, where just more money for individuals to spend on whatever they want would. And in Europe and Germany, the idea of UBI might actually be embraced more. Which third party halted Aspire's plan for DLC's Knights of the Old Republic 2 port? Is the article here, but they probably don't have an actual answer. We already talked about Ark Survival Ascended topping 600,000 sales in 2 weeks. Neil Druckmann is going to receive the Andrew Yoon Award at the New York Game Awards. This is the co-director writer of the Last of Us game, being awarded for his 20-year tenure at Naughty Dog and progressing from staff intern to co-president. In a lot of cases, it feels like until you are co-president or at the high upper management levels, you don't get any rewards at all. And then once you are in management, you tend to be able to just buy yourself awards, which that is probably a good indicator. If you're in any place other than a doctor's office and you see a bunch of awards behind somebody or on display in somebody's office, individual office in particular, that person is almost certainly an egomaniac and almost certainly bought half of those awards themselves or bribed people to get those awards. Like, real successful people tend not to hang awards up, or they tend to, managers in particular should be putting awards in the hallway for the entire team, and the entire team should be getting awarded, not just individual people. This Andrew Yoon Award in particular has always been a weird one, just because I have no idea who Andrew Yoon is, and so it's kind of ridiculous. Andrew Yoon Award is given to those labeled as, quote, game changers in the game industry, and has previously been appointed to Hideo Kojima and Phil Spencer. Yeah, both kind of high management people with, I suspect, fairly big egos. Yeah. I don't feel like it is actually a prestigious award. And I hope it never becomes a prestigious award at this rate. And then Baldur's Gate is getting an $80 physical edition, which is too much money. Alright, so then that's going to bring us to the fall list cleanup, and that should have brought up the auto blur, and it didn't. Let's see if we can do this. I don't think that's how it's supposed to look. Guess that's probably good enough, though. There we go. Good enough. There. I feel like I just put Enjoy the Dinner on the follow list. And yeah, I'm still not really ready to investigate it all the way through. Here we have a game that's not released yet, so we can move on from that. And the same is true for this. I wouldn't be surprised if we're close to that case in all the cases, in all the games we look at today. Insole doesn't look like anything. See, in some of these games, you could make an argument that they've been out for a couple months and they don't have 30 reviews, but I was giving 6 months to a year for most games. So, unless I saw something that was from 2022, I'd probably just give it more time. Just really just making this fall list cleanup kind of pointless. This one's from 2022, so I can remove this from the fall list. Part of the problem too is, why are we at the E's when we were at the F's? It's like we're going backwards instead of going forwards. I could be crueler, certainly, and start just tossing things that I know for a fact I would never want to play. That probably wouldn't be a terrible idea. Yeah, I think I could probably toss that, and that's fine. And I can toss this too. Alright, and we should be set up now for, see if we can fix the web peak a little bit here. There we go. Yeah, suffice it to say, all my advanced scene switcher macros are messed up now. We should be in good case now to look at all the new games on Steam. Hopefully we can burn through this fairly quickly. Let me bring my timer back up. Not gonna do anything for a hidden cat game. Chapter Wars. That's gonna be a no. Inevitably, definitely have gotten into a weird situation. I'll give this visual novel, anime girl, visual novel chance, where the overwhelming amount of adult games over the past 3 or 4 weeks has just really changed the way things have been done, and I was never really expecting it to hit that level. So I also don't have any fair way of correcting the problem or balancing it out more. We still have massive amounts of boring, uninteresting games, as I'm showing here, that don't even deserve a single line of dialogue from me, a bit of criticism, things that you can dismiss at the very first look. I'd almost give this a chance, but it's just too low polygon. And then we have adult games like Quickie Fantasy Adventure here, which I'll blur just for safety. This is a 2D, more Western style animation fantasy game with a decent variety of ladies and what looks like a couple of guys. It's free, interestingly enough. It's English and Chinese, but I don't think there's really a gameplay. So this game is being given away free, so in hopes that you would buy Quickie a Love Hotel Story, which looks like a different game completely, for $19.99. What this in particular allows me to do is put this game on the follow list, not because I particularly care about it, but to see what the amount of reviews would be for a free adult visual novel versus one you have to pay for. There is definitely an argument that making somebody pay for something, even a small amount, eliminates a lot of overly entitled people and may create better reviews, but it definitely wouldn't likely increase the number of reviews you would get in a game for a game. This is a weird looking game. Do I want to make a YouTube short around it? Oh, okay, I will. Every single one of these tabs was opened before the uBlock Origin tab was enabled. Plugin was re-enabled. So, yeah, that's not a big deal. It just means I'm having to scroll down every single time. This is some weird art style. A lot of the adult games definitely are of such a short amount of time or such of a low quality that it would make a lot of sense to. This is a new meme, I think. Or somebody's trying to make a meme. A lot of these memes feel like they're being pushed and promoted by very small groups of people. Very possibly people trying to make dumb games and sell them on Steam. But yeah, if about half of the adult games were free in the adult section of Steam, it would feel better quality with nothing else changing. It would just be closer to the equivalent of going to like a website like Pornhub, where there's just a ton of amateur and free uploaded videos, that adult videos that are not particularly good, or a lot of which are not worth looking at, but the variety is often appreciated. Here we have another adult game called Lust Bunker 18+, which is funny because I feel like there was another game that was called Lust Shelter, but this is definitely different. These are 3D CGI ladies, but not particularly at the highest and most realistic quality. They feel a little cartoony and a little smooth in their depiction, and the background is you're in this like bunker. It's a visual novel. It's selling for $6.19. It's English with full audio and subtitles, and interface support for 29 other languages. I would say though that the visuals do look fairly rough, and that would be a problem with it. Dungeon Golf. It's an interesting idea. It's already on the following list though, so I'll just leave it on the following list. Fray Space. Doesn't look interesting. Leaf. I'll give that a chance. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin 2 is on the following list already. Yep. Increasingly we will just see games that are either coming out of early access or just getting released directly. I think no to that game. I really could use just a break for the rest of the year. Just very few games coming out in general. This next game is a weird one. Weird adult game called Desires of the Amazonians or Amazons. It is half of the screenshots are like pencil sketch images, just 2D pencil sketch images. The gameplay in it looks like a very old Diablo 1 style RPG, and then occasionally you'll get images of some fairly low quality 3D EverQuest style CGI characters too. It almost feels like this is a game that would have been released decades ago, that without a good graphics card you could show this level of 3D CGI and 2D images. The 2D images themselves look fine. Everything else feels very rough. And it's weird to just have 3 different art styles in a game. It's selling for $14.99. It says it has interface and subtitle support for English, and then its next language it lists is Czech, then French, then Italian, then German, which makes me suspect it might be a Czech game, which would explain some of the art style choices too. But it definitely feels like it's all over the place, and that they probably should get rid of the 3D CGI depictions on the screenshots in favor of just highlighting only the 2D hand-drawn pencil sketches. Regardless, Desire of the Amazons just isn't quite polished enough to justify that price, so I'm definitely gonna pass on that one. And Note Heart. Of course, passing on a game at this point means very little, since I'm for the most part passing on all video games and very possibly have not bought any video games in 2023 at all, and don't really have enough of a justification to need to buy that many games. This one's already on the follow list. I'm not going to do anything with the Hidden Cat games. We've seen 2 Hidden Cat games already today. We have a Zombie Sanctuary Juliet, which is tagged as having nudity but isn't in the adult section. It's English and Chinese. It looks like garbage. Space Recall might be something. Disto Farm doesn't look interesting. This is probably the first game I've ever seen that has a Steam Deck screenshot of what the game would look like. Not that that's going to make me interested in actually playing this incredibly old school arcade looking game. medal for treasure. I guess it is worth pointing out that even if I'm spending more time talking about the adult games now that there's so many more of them, I'm still making way more YouTube shorts and putting way more non-adult games on the follow list. It's just that when there's something that's slightly interesting and deserves a YouTube short, it tends not to need that big of a description. The old picture is worth 1,000 words adage really does apply. So next we have yet another 3D CGI adult game, this one called Summer of Love. Let's say the 3D CGI here is back to that higher quality I would expect. Several ladies cheating, NTRing, whatever NTR means to you, it seems. Nothing otherwise particularly unique about it. It's called Summer of Love parentheses Captain Kitty, so maybe that's a specific character. And it has a free walkthrough, which is weird. It's English in the interface and subtitles, no voice acting. Apparently it has a pregnancy option. It says it has 6,000 images, 166 are erotic animations, 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. Which, yeah. Even though, relatively speaking, visual novels don't take as much work as making other games, still takes a massive amount of work. This too is already on the follow list to make a visual novel. Bluey. Yep. Unlike the Lego games, which Lego sets are getting really expensive. I did see a Slick Deals early this morning for a Lego set, but then I looked in my pile of Lego sets I haven't done yet and realized I already owned it. But it was like $50 off a $200 set, which is not bad. But yeah, a game based on Bluey in particular may not be that relevant in the next few years, because I could see the next generation of kids just not being into it, whereas Legos stay around forever and tend to be interesting. We have a new icon here. This game requires VR headset in order to play. System requirements. See system requirements for details. So no longer is it this red warning box. It is now just a VR yellow cube. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see updates. The fact that it is yellow in the background also highlights that Valve is about to change Steam drastically as far as the colors being used, because otherwise you just have like this little green message here and then it's all shades of blue or gray or white. This green in a few places too, sure. But yeah, yellow is a new color for the palette, to say the least. Do I want to put this on the follow list? Nah. Troll game where you play as a drunk person trying to get home. There was a game very similar to this a couple years ago, and yeah, same idea, didn't go anywhere. Game Bash. Doesn't look like anything. Urban Intel Special Ops. It's gonna be a no. Maid Marian. One of the problems with visual novels though is you kind of have to say yes to any of them, because who knows if the story is going to be good or not. All I can really do is look at the art and say, alright, the art looks good enough for a YouTube short, and then it's a matter of just getting down to, should I bother to promote and make YouTube shorts around visual novels at all, which is a bigger question I'll probably never answer. So here we have a controller icon too. So yeah, I was right. This is a new thing. They have softened the warning so that it is no longer just a red warning. Let's see. Blurred Weird Night. Looks like a Chinese horror game. Honestly, it doesn't look that terrible. $8.99. I'm gonna give it a chance. Even though it probably doesn't deserve it. Yeah, we have a hidden object game, I would guess. Guess it would come down to what are the other warnings you might see other than VR and controller input. You might see a few games that can only be played on like Linux or Mac OS, but the amount of those games is insignificantly small at the moment, and I don't expect that to change at all. But there definitely could be a push. Certainly. So far, Persona 5 Tacticia being well received. 80% positive of 130 reviews. Yeah, I definitely could see the Steam Deck pushing the idea of Linux by default game development. Although at a certain level, it would also have to come down to game developers wanting to make Linux versions of their games first and foremost, and make the Linux versions of their games, if they make a Linux versions, be the best they could be. I just don't know if there's video card I don't know if there's a video card support there really for game development on Linux that much, nor is there console support, since effectively Xbox games are Windows games, and I'd say PlayStation games are probably close to Windows games too. My douchey boss has a gentle twin brother, boys love visual novel. I mean, I guess we'll give that a chance. I'm seeing a lot of games already on the fall list. We have a Succubuzz app, Succubuzz, which, well, that's the name of the game. It's seemingly just a visual novel game that weirdly has male characters just in shadow and silhouette, which is not something I've really seen happen before. It's $5.39. It says it supports English, Chinese, and Japanese in interface and subtitles. Looks like there's 3 taller, older looking 2D anime style ladies, which we could show off the ladies here, I suppose. Then here we have one that's not in English, which is gonna be a no-go. I could definitely see, as far as minimum operating support being increased, as far as Steam to the point where they start dropping Windows 7 and Windows 8. I think they've said they were going to do that eventually. And then you really would just be at Windows 10 and Windows 11 or Linux or Mac OS. And I could see at that point there being an argument that you start to just see more and more people say, hey, let's just get rid of the Windows requirements. But unless you had something fairly successful like the Unity Unreal Engine or the Godot engine, with a lot of people moving over to the Godot engine, being able to support real game development, AAA game development on Linux, and it runs on Linux better than it runs on Windows, you're going to have a hard time convincing people to move over. Even if there's just big name titles like Modern Warfare, I'm going to say no to this game. It doesn't look like it's got enough going on as a rhythm game. But yeah, even if you have just like big name titles like Modern Warfare requiring you to have Windows, that's more than enough to have most gamers stick to Windows. And that's part of the success, certainly, of the Steam Deck right now, is that the Steam Deck feels very much like a Nintendo Switch that is getting ports of PC games that can be played on the Steam Deck. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be a direct replacement for every single PC game out there, every single AAA game. It'll probably take several generations. This Naruto game is being very poorly received. Yeah, I could see a Steam Deck 4 or 5 maybe making the argument that at that point almost all games are compatible in one way or the other. This is just yet another cat hidden object game. We've seen like 4 cat hidden object games today. More than we've even seen just your standard hidden object games. And at least your standard hidden object games often have multiple mini games, and it's not just hidden object games, even though that's what we call it. Yeah. Noticeably, there really hasn't been any major improvement as far as the Proton compatibility layer. I haven't heard anybody mention it on Steam in several months, and I imagine that's because the Proton compatibility layer only has so much improvement it can have before you're just hard coding adjustments for every single game, and several games like Modern Warfare are just unlikely to ever really be compatible. There's also been no improvement whatsoever as far as making Steam Deck compatible against anti-cheat software detectors. So yeah, I don't believe I've heard any story of a de novo game actually being playable on Steam, or a major player versus player game being played on Steam. There's also an argument that on a Steam Deck, I mean Steam Deck, not just Steam, there's also an argument that even if you had a Steam Deck docked and you were using a mouse and keyboard, you very well may not want to play on such a limited platform when trying to play professionally. This is an interesting, it says it's a visual novel, but it kind of feels more like a Stardew Valley type game. Interesting angles on this character, but it definitely feels very asset flippy too. Let's see. Might be closer to the end than I think. feel like this may have been an adult game before, and now it's not in the adult section. Which arguably it possibly should be, because you're like torturing inmates. Depictions of violence, gore, torture, mutilations, and killings. And this really does feel like this is the type of thing that should be in the adult section. And where we certainly could spread the definition of adult to mean more than just sexual based. Scarecrows of Illyria. I'll give it a chance. Well, we're not that close to the end, unfortunately. Although, who knows? Might get through the game. Shinogi Chess Club 2 Resistance. Here you have 2D anime girls, and here you have 3D realistic CGI characters. Feels like this is a story that's at least slightly based around playing chess. It looks to me like it's really is just chess. Although it's a visual novel, so you may not actually play chess at all in the game. They're calling it Shinogi chess, which is probably just the Japanese way of saying not Japanese chess. Well, I guess I have to give something that weird a chance. Universe for Sale looks interesting too. We still are getting small bursts of interesting games. I could see myself becoming incredibly deluded and uninterested in looking at all the games if, say, for 3 or 4 weeks straight, it was just 100% garbage games being released. But that's just never likely to really happen. Like, the video game industry at that point would have had to have been on the verge of collapse, of just poor quality, and I just don't think that's a real risk. That's first generation Atari style games. If that was all I was ever seeing for 2 or 3 weeks, then yeah, I would at that point probably reconsider how I look at games. It would be fairly unfair, though, to say, hey, during the winter months I'm only going to look at AAA games, and then in the slow months I'm going to look at other games. I like corgis, but I don't like this game enough. Although it kind of would make sense to kind of say that too, and play that way, to intentionally slow down my efforts. But it's also super inconsistent as far as people coming back and watching my streams and saying, well, he's not looking at all the games, although it comes down heavily to a question of whether anybody cares about me looking at all the games. Never had anybody say they like it, and I've never had anybody really say they hate it, but the statistics as far as it being later in the streams definitely highlights that there's fewer people watching by the time I get to them than at the very beginning. And there is definitely a lot of enthusiasm every now and then for playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At a certain level, I guess I would like to see more people rip me off. Of course, it's just a ton of investment time to take my idea of looking at all the games on Steam and bring your own personalities and twists to it, so it becomes a more normalized way of doing things. In the same way that I'd kind of like to see 24-hour news channels in particular, talk about every news story they can find instead of picking and choosing what gets them the most ratings. But it would have to be a streamer, effectively somebody who is probably streaming on Twitch instead of YouTube, that is just looking for more watch time and more comments, where it would really make a lot of sense. In fact, yes, these live streams would make a lot more sense on Twitch, just the way Twitch is built. But yeah, I'm not going to split my efforts. Here we have another 3D CGI adult. It says point and click, but I'd say it's probably closer to a visual novel. It's an adult game called My Office. It looks like there's 6 ladies, and maybe it is a bit of a point and click in that you're going around different locations on the map. Some of the 3D CGI background characters look considerably worse than the main protagonist female characters. Weirdly, this adult game though only has ladies in lingerie, no nudity on any of the screenshots. It's $2.99 and it's English and Italian, which might be an example of how maybe the Italian mentality has put more adult content in a game that otherwise could just have been a regular game. This is another one of these adult games though that is admitting it doesn't even have an ending and is in early access, which is just ridiculous. There really is no justification for that. Just finish your product before you put it out, or never put it out. There is something to be said for giving up if you can't finish a product, whatever your product is. Small Saga looks like an interesting thing. Rivers of Blood. It's like one of these asset flip Chinese games. Yep. Although it is marked as an adult game. Characters just getting dismembered. Frequent bloody scenes, general mature content. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything as far as the game goes though. True dice roller is nothing. Although in all fairness, a mobile phone dice roller app might be interesting. You're either going to ask people to pay probably too much for a dice rolling app, or you're going to put ads in it on a mobile phone app, and that too would be a ridiculous limitation. Suppose you could put ads on it as long as they're not pop-up full screen ads, and it would be fine. If there's just like an ad at the top and the bottom of a dice rolling app for free. But they've long since stopped making apps like that in favor of ridiculous 30 seconds full video apps. Yeah, and with the US potentially cracking down on monopolies and bad business practitioners, I'd love to see a class action suit go against like mobile phone app advertisers, even if whether that's Google or somebody else. We have another 3D CGI realistic color palette adult game called Hands of Gold. Looks like a visual novel. play as a brilliant gynecologist, which, yeah, I don't know how many ladies want to date their gynecologist. Hands of Gold is $4.99. It's English in interface and subtitles. I guess if you have a specific gynecological fetish or doctor fetish, this game is actually complete. It has 1,400 images, 32,000 words, several choices which change the story, and 3 different endings. What's weird is there's a guy here with a giant long beard, looks like a wizard, and that is typically not what you see. Almost exclusively all the male characters in adult games have clean shaven faces or small beards, goatees, things like that. Outer Stellar is already on the fall list. Johanne the Perron, Plays of the Deep Blue, is very well received, so I'll go ahead and put that on the wish list. I'm doing more fall list cleanup now in general, just by looking at the games once they're out of early access or once they've been released, which I guess that helps, but inherently I can't ever get rid of the fall list cleanup because I'll give this a chance even though it's mixed reviewed already, because there will just always be a percentage of games that never get released in early access from years ago. I'm hoping we're close to the end. But I said that like 20 minutes ago and still doesn't seem like it's anywhere close to being the truth. Just continue to try to burn through all these games as fast as possible. It's interesting that nobody has really thought of this. I'm going to put this on the fall list, but I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it. Nobody has thought of potentially having multiple video sources and having a switcher, having a director switch between the 2 or 3. Like, I could see between just having one other person playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, like, and then switching between the 2. If anything, what you see is if there are big live streamers, they will try and align their live streams to not overlap with other people's live streams, which I might be wise to investigate that myself, but I couldn't be consistent enough on the time frames for that to work. We have a family-friendly version of a waifu fighter, which, yeah, there might be something to that idea. Whereas, how do you get the non-family friendly version of waifu family fighter? Is there a way to get that? Or is this really a case where they're just putting the games family friendly in the name? Still says it may contain violence, partial nudity, sexual innuendo, and other mature content, but maybe this is the new gimmick we're going to start seeing, is that we'll see games with family friendly in the name when they totally are not family friendly. That's always been a problem too, is innuendo or mild sexual content versus regular sexual content. There's no metric there to really be measured. I would rather see it. Here's another game that probably should be in the adult section but isn't, cosplay relaxation, $19.99. Bunch of languages, none of which have audio or subtitles. Yep. The thing we haven't been saying is games like this that feel like they pretty obviously should be in the adult section, not listed in the adult section. So these last two have been kind of weird for that. Yeah, I could see it becoming kind of standard that you start to see a pushback in an attempt to say, hey, we have family friendly in the name, therefore don't put our game in the adult section. And yeah, the fight will go on forever as far as developers and publishers not wanting their game hidden behind the family section and the adult section that 99% of people on Steam won't see, and Steam trying to create and maintain an adult section that makes sense to the consumer. Alright, finally we are getting close to the end. This looks interesting as far as horror imagery. The Unlikely Prometheus. Yeah. Ideally, though, I would like to see either a text-based or just a pictorial-based description of what you would see in an adult game. So if you just showed me the backside and the front side of a silhouette of a male or female, and then you just put a number like 5+, 10+, 20+ on boobs, on butts, on genitalia for the male and females, then you would give me a much better understanding. And you could certainly bring that down to just being initials and text, where if you just put F, let's see, breasts or boobs would be B, buttocks would also be B, so BA, let's go with it, as, and then B, so it could be BAV standard, and it just could be like boobs 10+, and it could be a range too. It's like you see one boob, you see two boobs, individual boobs versus one pair. You probably just count them by pair. And then males, you could have a category. Male would just be, well, I guess it could be, instead of boobs or boobs, it could be C for chest. Chest for male, chest for female. And how many times do you see a bare chest on a male? How many times do you see a butt on yeah, it could be CBG, really. Chest, butt, genitalia. As far as just how many numbers, what range. And if you are hitting a point where it's like this adult game you're going to see more than 10, then that's more than enough information. Whereas 1 is probably a little bit more acceptable if you just happen to see one boob in general in the entirety of a game. But yeah, that would be a much more helpful system instead of what they've got, which is a system which they've designed specifically to not be that helpful as far as knowing what it is. And they do have websites like that that really get into the deep details about reviewing movies and other forms of entertainment. I don't know if there is a focus on the family style website, which is highly Christian conservative type websites, but they are very helpful as frankly giving you the exact details. I don't know if there's something like that for video games, but there is definitely room for something like that. And that's really where the ESRB should be stepping in and helping out. So overall, as we go through the last few games that were new games to put on the follow list, it comes down to, I saw about maybe 9 or 10 new games being announced of interest today from Gamatsu, and then I saw probably closer to 50 or 60 new games still on Steam that were interesting enough to make a YouTube short on. And overall, I mostly just failed miserably on making progress on the ritual contest on Yu-Gi-Oh! Or doing anything in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.